Okay, so comparative literature. Okay, so whenever we will be going to this course, first thing that comes in our mind, that is, what is comparative literature? Comparative literature, as the title suggests, that is, we will see some sort of comparison in this course. And what sort of comparison? That would be our concern. Comparison will be there. Comparison of whom and comparison of which subject, comparison in which way, comparison in which time. Many questions will be coming in our mind when we will be talking about this course, comparative literature. In this regard, we'll see that comparative literature very, uh, very simply, we can give the definition that comparative literature involves the study of text across cultures. Okay. So text then means literary text. Comparative literature will be comparing text of several literatures of several cultures. And after whenever it will be going to comparison, we can say that comparative literature is interdisciplinary. That means interdisciplinary comparison will be there in comparative literature. And here I said that, yeah, what type of comparison will be there? Okay, so that comparison will be based on structure, time, place, and many things. Just for an example, that means two literary pieces of two languages. That means a literature from Bangla language, a literature from English language can be compared in comparative literature, as well as a comparison, a literature from Spanish culture and a literature from German culture. That two texts from two cultures can also be compared in comparative literature. And again, even if two literary texts of one language, they can also be compared. Suppose two novels written in Bangla language, one is written in 18th century and one is written in 20th century. So a literature of same language of two different times can also be compared in this text, in this course, that is the comparative literature. And these are the canons of comparative literature. Actually, and what we'll be comparing, that question comes in our mind. In this regard, structures. When we had been discussing the syllabus, we have seen that Iliad's Odyssey and Michael Madhusudan Dutt's Meghnad, they are both epic poems. So the structure are same. So structure of two different texts can also be compared in comparative literature. And also the patterns will also be compared in comparative literature. And not only the differences, but also the similarities of two texts can also be compared in comparative literature. And similarity in language, similarity in culture, similarity in context, that can also be compared in comparative literature. And in this regard, this person, Matthew Arnold, most probably you have heard the name. No, all of you have heard his name. He is a Victorian poet and writer. And Matthew Arnold did his BA from Oxford University. And in a lecture at Oxford University, Matthew Arnold said that is, why? What is the necessity of comparative literature? What is the necessity of comparison? As I have said it earlier at the very initial stage of my today's lecture, that I said that, yeah, when we will be comparing two texts, when we will be comparing two texts of different cultures, two texts of different languages, two texts of different context, when you will be comparing, you will have a better idea and a quite similar notion initiated by Matthew Arnold very early, that is in 1857. And in this regard, we can say that Matthew Arnold is the first writer and poet who talked about comparative literature. He said that everywhere there is a connection. Everywhere there is a connection, and everywhere there is an illustration. In a single event, no single literature is adequately comprehended except in relation to the other events, to the other literature. It means that literature in isolation is simply a literature. When you will be putting a literature of Bangla language at the side of a literature of English language, French language, German language, then both literature, that means the literature of Bangla language and the literature of English language will get acquainted with each other, and what are the good sides and what are the bad sides, what are the dissimilarities, what are the similarities among these two texts that can be discovered through research. And for this reason, Matthew Arnold has nicely mentioned that everywhere there is a connection, comparative literature will find out or will try to discover the connection of two literary texts. That's very important notion, or that you can put in the definition of comparative literature, that comparative literature will try to discover, will try to find out, will try to pinpoint the connection among literatures, among different and diversified cultures, settings, and context. So that is Matthew Arnold. It means, that means when you will be our understanding and reading will be appropriate when we will be comparing Chaucer. Chaucer, you know, that English poet and author and the civil servant. And yeah, there is a Chaucer is a poet of Middle Ages, and especially he has written the Canterbury Tales, Non-Priest Tales, and many long poems he has written. And Chaucer's reading of Chaucer's will not be appropriate if we do not put Chaucer's writing at the side of Boccaccio's writing, another Italian writer and poet. Okay, so whenever you will be putting Chaucer's writing at the side of Boccaccio's writing, then you can understand what are the good sides, in which way Chaucer and in which way Boccaccio pinpointed the notions in their literature. And if we move forward, we'll see that William Shakespeare, a great English poet, dramatist, and actor as well, though we are not sure whether in which play he acted. He acted, especially William Shakespeare started his career at that theater at the earlier stage. So in that case, you can say that William Shakespeare is also an actor. And William Shakespeare, he has written 38 plays. He has written 154 songs. Okay, so who is My Mystery's Eyes Are Nothing Like the Sun? Who is someone's microphone is vibrating? Would you please make the microphone muted? Okay, so William Shakespeare's Macbeth. What is in which story, in which folktale William Shakespeare collected the story of Macbeth, the story of Merchant of Venice, the story of King Lear. Okay, so William Shakespeare, it is assumed that William Shakespeare borrowed his materials from several sources, from Latin, French, Spanish, folktale, Italian folktale, and cultures. Okay, so reading Shakespeare's will be appropriate when you will try to discover William Shakespeare's materials sources. And that would be done in comparative literature. Same thing will be happening. That means William Shakespeare is an English poet, and Baudelaire, another poet, and Edgar Allan Poe, American writer and poet. So if we compare William Shakespeare with Edgar Allan Poe, Baudelaire, then a study of Shakespeare will be appropriate as well as the study of Baudelaire and Edgar Allan Poe will also be appropriate. Okay, so in such a way, comparative literature will try to discover several facts, several regularities, several dissimilarities in literature.
Mm. Mm.
So what I said, that means whenever we will be studying literature, if we do not compare a literature with other literature, that study will not be appropriate. Okay, so William Shakespeare, he borrowed his sources from Latin, Spanish, and other Italian folktales and culture. In the same way, we can compare Baudelaire, Edgar Allan Poe with William Shakespeare. Okay, so uh, again, we can also compare other, that means many English novelists with 19th century Russian writers and in translation. That means Russian writers, they wrote in Russian language. That's very common, but they wrote in Russian language. So Russian language literature were translated in English language. And so we can compare English novelist with Russian novelist or writers in translations. Okay. So these are the way we will be comparing one literature or a literature of one language with literature of other language. And again and again, we will see that James Joyce, that means the famous Irish novelist and poet, he it is assumed that also, like William Shakespeare, that James Joyce borrowed many things from Italo Svevo, another Italian writer, businessman, and novelist. Okay, so James Joyce is a famous Irish novelist, poet, and literary critic. He borrowed many things, like William Shakespeare, from another another Italian writer. That means Italo is Svevo. Okay, and same thing will be happening about Clarice Lispector, okay, of Jean Rhines. And Jean Rhines is a British novelist. Okay. And again, Jean Rhines recalls of Djuna Barnes. Okay, so she is an Afghan American writer. Okay, so uh, in this same way, okay, so we can see Annis Nin, and we can compare with Rhines and Annis Nin with each other. So it means that when we will be judging literature written by one writer with a literature written by another writer, we will be discovering so many facts, so many things that are innate in literature. As I have said, that literature nowadays has been diversified. Many things are directly connected with literature. Literature study are not with the study of simply novels, poetry, and dramas. Literature study has gone through several genres, several aspects of human sciences, several aspects of human sciences and discoveries, that is cultural studies, gender studies, and everything. Okay, so in such a way, that means Matthew Arnold in 1857, he said that there will be a connection. So Matthew Arnold's views about comparative literature is quite good and can be justified, that everywhere there is a connection. And it means that if we study literature in isolation, that means if we study a literature of one specific language, and if we do not compare that literature with other literature of other cultures of language, that study will not be completed. That is the motive of comparative literature. In order to justify a true literary pitch, then you have to compare one literature with others. We have no alternatives. And again, we see that another German poet, playwright, novelist, scientist, spaceman, theater director, you have seen, you have known his name, that is Goethe. Goethe called comparative literature wealth literature, wealth, wealth literature. So getting so many things about comparative literature. Comparative literature, like Matthew Arnold, Goethe called it that literature will be termed as a world literature. In which way? That means, as Matthew Arnold said, there is a connection. So literature cannot be studied in isolation. So if there is a connection among all the literatures of the world, that literature can be called world literature. So Goethe's comment is quite similar with Matthew Arnold's comment of connection among literature. And for this reason, Goethe encourages everyone to keep informed about foreign production. Goethe said that yes, you are writing something, but a writer, a researcher of literature cannot keep himself or herself isolated. He or she has to be informed about the world production, world foreign production about literature. And that is another way of getting connection with other literature from other cultures and contexts. Okay. And Goethe actually commented in such a way that poetry is the common property of all mankind. Okay. Goethe said that yes, whenever you will be discussing about poetry, poems, this poetry is common in every context, in every cultures, in every time, and in every situation. You will be getting poetry. So Goethe put that comment as well. So comparative literature is a way of reading literature, and which reading can be made easier by international marketing of books and by the availabilities of translation. So whenever we will be reading comparative literature, we will try to compare literature across cultures. This way, Bangla literature will be compared with French literature, and French literature will be compared with Spanish literature. In such a way, a literature will have the international marketing. And whenever so many scholars will try to discover new things among literature, that would be the international marketing, and many new things will come in our hand when we will go on comparative study of the text. So that was the situation of Matthew Arnold and Goethe in the 20th century. That means we are very much happy to see such kind of characteristics of comparative literature. But in the 20th century, comparative literature got some questions. Many critics asked very few questions against comparative literature. What is they? What are they? What are the objects of study in comparative literature? They try to ask. How can comparison be the object of anything? They vehemently said that, yeah, comparison cannot be the object of anything. And if individual literature have a canon, what might be comparison canon be? Okay. So canon, that means the great literature. Individual literature, suppose English literature, there are several important and great writings in English, and these important and great writings are called canon. So if individual literature have a canon, what might comparative canon be? That means in which way we will pinpoint the in literature we have great literature. So in comparative literature, what would be the comparative literary canon? So this question came into the mind of many critics at the end of 20th century. Okay. And how does the comparatist select what to compare? So these questions came into discussion. And is comparative literature a discipline? Discipline means subject. That means many discipline. It has another name. Is it a individual subject or it is a sub genre of it is related to other subject? So this question comes into the mind of several critics at the end of the 20th century. Or is it simply a field of study? So this question came in the mind of several critics at the end of the 20th century. Though we have got so many great influence after getting the definition and after getting the way of comparing literature across cultures. So this question we have to answer. So here, Rene Wellek, a Czech American comparative literary critic, termed this question as the crisis of comparative literature. So many, at that time, many critics, comparatists, many comparatists, they are called comparatists. The comparatists could not answer such kind of question that what is the object of comparative literature, what is the comparison cannot be, and what is it a, is it a discipline or a field of study? So, and for this reason, Rene Alex said, this is actually, this question cannot be answered with a clear-cut way. And for this reason, this is the crisis of comparative literature. So comparative literature arouses strong passions and enthusiasm in one hand, and the other hand, comparative literature invites a strong criticism against itself. So at the end of the 20th century, many critics asked many questions against comparative literature. Benedetto Croce, another Italian historian, humanist, and foremost Italian philosopher, he argued that comparative literature is non-subject and dismissed vehemently that comparative literature must be considered as a separate discipline. Another critic, he said that no, comparative literature cannot be termed as a separate discipline. It might be a field of study. Croce defines comparative literature as comparative literature is the exploration of vicissitudes, alterations, developments, and reciprocal differences of themes and literary ideas across literature. Okay, so Croce said that actually comparative literature is not a subject, or rather, it's a way of comparing several issues relating to literature of different contexts and different cultures. So Croce came up with such kind of definitions. And comparative literature can be called the study of literary history instead of calling a separate discipline. So Croce answered that question. So it might not be, comparative literature might not be a different discipline. Rather, it can be called a study of literary history. So if comparative literature can be called the literary history, then only the history will be compared over there. But Croce suggested in such a way. Mentioning Max Koch, founder and the editor of the two German comparative journals, he said that Croce claimed that Max Koch didn't distinguish between literary history and comparative literature. So this person, Max Koch, he published several journals relating two journals relating to comparative literature. Croce said that yeah, Max Koch didn't distinguish between literary history and comparative literature. It is his point. And giving this point, he said that literary comparative literature simply is the study of literary history. So Croce claimed that comparative literature has no substance to it. So finally, Croce commented that yeah, comparative literature cannot be a subject. It is a field of a study. Here we see another North American comparative literature. Charles Mills Galley answered Croce's claim in the following manner. According to Charles Mills Galley, Literature is distinct and integral medium of thought and a common institutional expression of humanity which is uh, differentiated so by social condition of the individual, by racial, historical, cultural, and linguistic influences and opportunities and restrictions, but irrespective of age, promoted by common needs, aspirations of man sprung from common faculties, psychological and physiological, obeying common laws of material smooth of individuals and social humanity. So, this man, Charles Galley, pointed many things against Cross claim. Cross said that it's a literary history, simply is a field of study. But here, Charles Galley, he pointed many things in comparative literature. So in literature, he said that literature can simply cannot be the production of an isolated writer. However, we see the history, the culture, individual aspects, the lexical aspects, linguistics aspects, and the influence, everything, psychological, physiological, and the loss of materials mood of individual and social humanity. So many social sciences and social human sciences are included in literature. So Kelly wanted to say that comparative literature is itself not only a study of history. In literature, so many things are included. What are the things? That is the lexical things, historical, cultural, linguistic, social things, everything are included. So if all other things are included in comparative literature, all the things can be compared with each other. Whereas cross-termed and limited comparative literature in comparative history only, Charles Mills Galley adds individual and social condition, racial, cultural, linguistics, different age groups, psychological, physiological aspects with comparative literature. So now, with the clarification of Charles Millet, comparative literature got so many fields to be compared. In 1974, another sentiment expressed by Francois Jost. He said that national literature cannot constitute an intelligible field of study because of its arbitrarily limited perspectives. So if you study a national literature or any national literature, so it will be isolated field. So that cannot be intelligible field of study. Whereas comparative literature represents more than an academic discipline, it is an overall view of literature, of the world of letters, a humanistic ecology, a literary philosophy, and view of life, a vision of cultural universe, inclusive and comprehensive. So, supporting Charles Mills Galley, another critic, that is Francois Jost, he put that yeah, literature is simply not a literature because it is not only a discipline, it is more than an academic discipline because humanistic ecology and literary philosophy, everything are included in literature. That is, if so many things are included in literature, all the things can be compared with each other. Okay, so for Jost and like Millet proposes, comparative literature is a kind of world religion. Okay, because most probably you have heard, you can remember the comment of Goethe. Goethe said that yes, everything, that means every writer should be connected with the foreign production. In this way, comparative literature is a kind of world religion. So with the spectacle of comparative literature, you can see the culture, religion, philosophy, sociology, human sciences of all over the world. In this way, we can say that comparative literature is a kind of world literature or kind of world religion. It means when a reader reads a great work, all cultural differences disappear. Art is seen as an instrumental of universal harmony. Comparative is one who facilitates the spread of that harmony. Okay, so if you actually a literature of any culture, if it is a great literature that can make every reader of the world happy. And for this reason, this art is seen as an instrumental of universal harmony. So comparative literature is not simply a literature or a field of study. It covers so many things in it. Comparatist must possess is special skill. Who will be the comparatist? That means if you compare two texts, you can be called comparative. But comparatists will have some skill. What are the skills? Rene Wellek and Warren, in their Theory of Literature, a book that was enormously significant in comparative literature when it was first appeared in 1949, suggests that comparative literature will make high demands on the linguistic proficiency of our scholars. Actually, uh, bilingual, multilingual, bilingualism, multilingualism. If you know two languages, you may be called bilingual. If you know more than two languages, you may be called multilingual person. Okay. So comparatist first thing is that a comparatist should be multilingual. It asks for a widening of perspectives or suppression of local and provincial sentiments not easy to achieve. So a comparative should have the diversified হাজার বছর ধরে আমি হাঁটিতেছি পথ হাঁটিতেছি পৃথিবীর পথে. Okay. So Jivanananda Das said so. So it is not possible that a person will work for 1,000 years. In such a way, a comparatist will have diversified perspectives, diversified knowledge of adapting or receiving or integrating cultures across the world and norms, ethics, and context of the world. First thing, he or she has to be multilingual, and he or she, second thing, he or she has to be a person of diversified cultural and humanistic and psychological context. He or she has to have such kind of knowledge. So the comparatists have depicted someone with a vocation. Actually, there are two kinds of motivation: intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation. If you want to learn things, you might be motivated in two ways. Intrinsically, that means extrinsically, that means you are studying English literature or language, that means you want to have a good job. It is your extrinsic motivation. And intrinsic motivation, what is that? I want to study Bengali literature because I love Bengali literature. And if anybody loves to do a thing out of any material gain, that kind of motivation is called intrinsic motivation. And that is quite similar with vocation. A comparatist will have the enthusiasm to grasp different culture, different norms, different psychological, physiological, and social and human sciences phenomena. He or she has to have such kind of vocation. And for this reason, a comparatist can be called an international ambassador. Okay, so international ambassador of comparative literature of United Nations. So he or she will be like that. So when you will be a comparatist, you should have such kind of knowledge and ideas, and you should have such kind of vocation. Wellek and Renan state that literature is not as art and humanity are one. Literature is one, and art and humanity are one. So these are the two different things. Goethe confidently asserts in 1827 that national literature means little now. What does it mean? That means if we see a literature in a national perspective, that means with a country's perspectives, that is very narrow perspectives of literature. When one national literature put in United Nations perspectives, put in worldly perspectives, that literature will get much recognition, much uh, research, and much field to be discovered. And for this reason, Getty commented the national literature means a little known. Again, uh, Wellek offers cultural equivalent of the movements towards the United Nations Assembly, and that was felt powerfully after the Second World War. Okay. So a decade later, theory of literature appeared, and comparative literature was gaining ground in 1960 decades and 1970 decades. So after getting so many criticism and after getting so many argument and counter argument, comparative literature got its foundation in 1960 and 1970 decades. And that great wave of critical thought of comparative literature moved forward through one after another, for structuralism to post-textualism, feminism to deconstruction, from semiology to psychoanalysis. So in such a way, comparative literature was gaining its solid foundation in the history of comparative literature. And next time, um, comparative literature to the role of a reader. In the history, we observe that each new discipline and subject broke over the previous one. Okay, actually, we people, we scholars, actually nowadays, we are getting so many new things in our mind. Once upon a time, we would write letters, but next time, for the virtual media, we are not getting acquainted with them. We want to pass. Once upon a time, many person would watch the TV news, but nowadays, for the virtual media, many persons say that, yes, I don't watch television. That means they are getting so many things. So once upon a time, television was up to mark, and next time television uh, got lost its importance when we have got different things. So in the human sciences, in the history of human sciences, human mind always try to catch the new one. So one principle comes and another principle goes. In such a way, human psychology and human mind always are ready to catch a new things, a novel things. And for this reason, that is called modern aspects of a modern man will always try to have new things. And for this reason, one of the basic tenets of modernism is the avant-garde movement. Avant-garde always you will be trying to move forward. In such a way, literature, comparative literature, one literature, comparative literature is gaining its foundation, and next time other form of literary criticism, other form of branches of literature came into existence. It is the way it is the ways, it is the go of human minds, it is the go of modern human minds and research. In such a way, comparative literature passes to one after another. And in 1950 and in the early 60s decades, Western graduate students turned to comparative literature as a radical subject. So before 1950, 1960, and 1970 decades, comparative literature was not a major subject, but in 1950, 60, and 70 decades in European countries, in Western countries, comparative literature became a prominent subject, and that subject to study in universities and in many universities. It was caused to because of the time of transgressiveness, and everyone moved to do across the boundaries of single literary studies. Okay, so comparative literature offered. That means a competition will be an international ambassador. In that way, every human mind want to transgress his boundary. So comparative literature offered the Western scholars to transgress the boundary, and for this reason, they pick it as a rudimentary, as a major subject of study. In 1969, Harry Levin complained not to be agonized about theory of comparative literature, but to do more practical work of comparing the literature. So up to the 1970 decades, comparative literature was only on its theoretical perspectives. So here Levin said, no, we shouldn't pass our time discussing the theory relating to comparative literature. We have to we have to go to the practical work. That means that in our syllabus, that means we have to compare. And Levin's proposal proved failed, and when new generation of Western graduate moves to literary theory, women studies, semiotics, film and media studies, and cultural studies. Okay, so at that time, some new genres. So comparative literature became a hot cake up to 1970 decades. But after 1970 decades, some other aspects came into discussion. That is literary theory, women's studies, semiotics, film and media, cultural studies, and so on. So that were the things. As I have said, that human mind and human scholars are always ready to receive a new and novel thing. So gradually, comparative literature got its foundation, and next time, some other fields came into existence. Though comparative literature was underway in the West, it began to gain ground in the rest of the world. So in the Western perspectives, living comparative literature, they studied literary theory, women studies, and semiotics, but film and media studies and others. But other parts of the world, except the Western countries, other parts of the world, comparative literature flourished with uh, uh, flourished in a different way. That means, for example, comparative literature began to emerge in China, Taiwan, Japan, other Asian countries. These countries especially focused on the evaluation of national literature through the opportunity of comparative literature. Actually, China, Taiwan, Japan, and Asian countries, what did they do? After getting acquaintance with the comparative literature, they were trying to focus their own literary literature with other literature. And through the comparison, they tried. That means the Asian, Taiwan, Japanese people, and the Asian peoples, they were trying to evaluate their own literature by comparison. They got this inspiration. Shapun Majumdar in India, he said that in spite of deploration of Anglo-American critique as a methodology, comparative literature has struck roots in the third world nations and in India in particular. Ganesh Devi goes further and suggests that comparative literature in India is directly linked to the rise of the modern Indian nationalism. Okay, so whenever a country will try to uplift their own national literature, it is in another way to uplift the Indian nationalism. Noting that comparative literature has been used to assert the national cultural identity. So literature is not isolated from culture. Literature is the product of a specific culture, specific norms, specific individual, specific cultural setting and context. So whenever national literature or any literature will be discussed, then this ethnic, religious, cultural, and other things will be evaluated. So in such a way, Ganesh Devi goes on to say that is comparing literature is a way of uplifting nationalism through the discussion of national literature. So it doesn't mean the national literature and comparative literature as being conflicting each other. No, it doesn't mean. But actually through the flourishment of national literature, comparative literature was gaining its ground in the other parts of the world. That means the African, Asian, Chinese, and Japanese perspectives. So this is what we have seen in this uh, in this class. That is, comparative literature is a literature that will be compared literary texts across culture, and this comparison, what will be compared, in which way it will be compared. We got so many questions in our hand, but approximately we have got the answer that literature is not a isolated product. Literature is the production of uh, of a country's culture, ethics, psychology, and other things. So when we will be comparing a literature, comparing national literature with others, that comparison will be the flourishment of nationalism, and it is also a way of gaining ground the national literature. And in such a way, comparatists will be an international ambassador, and comparatists will be surfing towards the world culture and world literature. So thank you very much for uh,